Welcome everyone to another episode of Let's Talk Special Economic Zones. I'm your host Ainsley Brown. I'm the Senior Director for Regulations, Policy Monitoring and Enforcement at the Special Economic Zone Authority of Jamaica. In today's episode, we are going to delve into how do you measure performance? How do you know whether or not a zone program or a zone itself or individual company within a zone is a success? Now, there are many ways to measure it, and importantly, this is something that zone authorities will be doing, and it will vary per zone authority what the importance of the zones are, what they were brought in, what the key objectives are, and such and so forth. Now, there's many ways, as I said, that zone performance or individual company performance within a zone can be measured. Of course, jobs is a major factor. Otherwise, the zones wouldn't really exist, right? However, we need to go beyond, and I know in Jamaica we have started to do this, go beyond simply just measuring total number of jobs. That is one metric, yes, but we also look at improvements or upgrades, and that's a critical word within a zone, upgrading, because most zones or zone programs are brought in for economic benefit, social benefits, and what a government wishes to see, and certainly in Jamaica, is an upgrade and an improvement in various metrics or various measures across the board. So jobs is one, yes, but we want to see greater gender equality at the managerial level. Top management, greater, more women in top management as an example. And of course, these things won't happen overnight. They'll take time to happen. Some things will happen faster than others, but over time, these are the types of improvements we want to see. With jobs, we also want to see decent work. We want to see improvement in skills levels. Now, one way to measure or a yardstick that could be used for zone authorities or governments around the world is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them, of course, ranging from ending or reducing poverty to decent work, as I mentioned, to environmental issues around life on under the sea or life on land and so forth. So they're quite wide ranging, but they can be used as a very important yardstick. In Jamaica, we use them in more than one way. We use them firstly when admitting somebody into the regime. So we measure them to say, how are they performing using the SDGs, amongst other things, which I'll get into in a bit. But then also when it comes time for measuring performance within our performance index, which we're developing and rolling out and should be out by late 2021, early 2022. That's part of the measurement that we do. We look into, SDG performance. We also have a development program or development document, the National Development Program or National Development Document, which is affectionately known as Vision 2030. It's aimed at transforming Jamaica to be a developed country by 2030. That's another measurement. So what we have done, and SDGs are actually policy, official policy, Government of Jamaica policy. So what we have done is we've combined several policies that are development focused, and then we use that to both study how a proposal, what a company is proposing to do, and then also thereafter how they're actually performing. So that's one way. That's an example of what could be done or what could a country could do to measure, and the SDGs are a international measure. Another way of looking at things or measuring a performance is, as I said before, it's about upgrading. So how is that company, how are the zones contributing to the upgrading, skills development, skills training, technology, Technology transfer can be a bit of a controversy because oftentimes it's associated with forced technology transfer, but I'm not referring to that. I'm referring to whereby, for example, a company, because they wish to engage with the wider community, engages in a supplier training program to bring the supplier up to their standard, to an international standard. Now, that has a great or wider spillover effect, as I mentioned before in another episode about spillover effects, than simply supplying them, because now that company within the local economy has now been upgraded and now can meet other international standards and further export to other markets that were before closed to it. So that's of critical importance. Another area is infrastructure. Now, in order for zones to thrive, you need on-site and off-site infrastructure. Now, the on-site infrastructure, depending on the model, if it's the government that is building and it's a plug-and-play type of model whereby the governments build out the facilities and then invite people to come and occupy, rent, lease, or even buy the zones, then of course the government is responsible for putting that in. However, if it is like Jamaica has more of a private sector driven model whereby the private sector is invited to come along and make a proposal to where they want to locate their zones. Now, if that's the case, the infrastructure, provided they follow the local building codes and so forth, are the responsibility of the investor. Now, the connecting infrastructure, that's a different matter. The roads, the rail, the water, electricity, all of those different things that are outside the zone that connected to the domestic economy and connected to the wider world, that's very different. Now, if certain economies such as Jamaica has certain industries that are deregulated and are run by the private sector. So for example, electricity, there is a monopoly on distribution, but not a monopoly on generation, but it's a closely regulated, as you can well understand, industry. But in terms of roads, again, that would be the government in order to connect from the ports, airports, to the zones and back and forth, or between zones. So it's very important that those upgrades happen. In addition, there is something that is which is cross-cutting, which is oftentimes overlooked, but it is something that really will play out much more over the years as we go along in developing the country, in Jamaica specifically, but the wider world, and that's governance. The zones must result, if you want to measure their performance and see that they are actually doing positives. Governance and upgrading governance is very important. And by governance, I mean, as I mentioned before, about standards, about upgrading. Are your workers up to a particular standard? Are your suppliers that are locally based up to a certain standard? Those are governance issues. There's also wider governance issues, of course, in terms of how a zone or the zone program is administered and, centered around the rule of law and around transparency and accountability. Those things are things that investors look at before they invest and after they invest. So it's very important that that groundwork be there, and that there is an upgrading of whatever governance structures there are in the country at the time to something higher and at a world-class level. So those things become very important in terms of attracting investment, both local and overseas. Governance is of growing import these days, as well as environmental issues. Those are become of growing import. Climate change is not just a buzzword or buzz term, it's actually a reality. So how are investments combating or mitigating against climate change, for example, in terms of environmental impact. Climate, of course, is not the only environmental impact, but a very important one. How are those things being mitigated or improved overall? Energy efficiency, energy, how energy is generated, how energy is saved. Jamaica has the use of renewable energies sources, sun, solar, wind, biomass, etc. Those things are becoming of ever greater importance. So those are measures that can be used by people that are designing, and also for investors. Investors can assess themselves along those same measures or same metrics, particularly multinationals. How are they performing? How are they performing globally? They have to report to their shareholders, and if they're not doing it themselves, the zone authorities would do them, and it becomes a very valuable exercise for them to measure themselves or be measured by the zone authorities or governments, and be able to report back to their shareholders to say, hey, this is what we're doing in Jamaica or Malaysia or Indonesia or Haiti or Costa Rica or wherever in the world. And we are being measured critically by their governments, and this is our performance. Sometimes there will be negatives, but those are opportunities for improvement. So in general, I would say that's one way, or a way or methodology of measuring zone performance. So if you like this episode, please like, share, and comment on the episode, or could you suggest some future episodes that you would like to hear? Bye for now.